So here in New York City, did you know that there are only 5 female historical figures depicted in statues in outdoor public spaces? All of them are in Manhattan. I'm sure you know that one is Eleanor Roosevelt in Riverside Park, another of Harriet Tubman in Harlem. There have been multiple efforts arising to erect statues of prominent, groundbreaking women here in New York City, and my next guest is one of the leaders of an effort to do just that. I'd like to bring on Namita Luthra, director at the Elizabeth Cady, Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony Statue Fund, Incorporated, which is an all-volunteer nonprofit seeking to place the first statue honoring women's history in New York City's Central Park as part of the Monumental Women campaign. Welcome to City Watch, Namita.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So first, tell me a little about the Statue Fund and the Monumental Women campaign. What do you hope to achieve?
Yeah, so as you said, Monumental Women is a nonprofit, all-volunteer organization. We were founded in 2014. We have a 3-part mission. Breaking the bronze ceiling in Central Park was aim number 1. It's time in the park's 165-year history that it has, at long last, a statue that honors the contributions of women. Our second aim is an educational campaign about women's history and the invaluable contributions that women have made to this country. And our final aim is putting out a challenge to all municipalities across the country to rethink their public spaces and to include all the women and people of color who have helped make their cities great. We've had the unwavering leadership of Pam Elam, who's our board president. She's continued to keep the process moving forward and the group moving forward.
It's funny. I believe I had worked with Pam years ago when, if I'm correct, she worked for Senator Tom Duane. That's how far I go back with her. We're heading into the 1-year countdown of the centennial of the 19th Amendment, but the fight for women to get the right to vote took much longer. What did it take?
It took everything. The struggle to win the vote was a long, complicated, and multifaceted one. It took 72 years and countless diverse women to finally make it a reality. The statue in Central Park that Monumental Women will be unveiling on August 26, 2020, the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, will honor the women's rights pioneers of the suffrage movement. And that movement was the largest nonviolent revolution in this country's history that gave over half the population the franchise. The Declaration of Sentiments adopted at the Seneca Falls Convention in 1948 that Frederick Douglass, among others, helped push forward to passage said this in part. It said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." And to our 21st century ears, that sounds reasonable, maybe even obvious. But at that time, for that public pronouncement to be made by women was extraordinary. This was at a time when women weren't even allowed to speak publicly, let alone demand the equal guarantees of citizenship. So I think it's important when we look back now from our vantage point to really remember what an incredibly different time it was then. So yes, the fight for the vote was arduous. It was unrelenting. Many of the women who fought in the early part of it never lived to see the passage of the amendment that ultimately guaranteed universal suffrage.
And you mentioned August 26, 2020, something for us to look forward to next year. But stepping back, how did this whole effort to create the Monumental Women campaign, how did this come together and what has the process been like?
It's been a challenging one, but a rewarding one. Early on, before I joined the board, it was decided that this first statue, and the idea was that this would be the first of several statues, that this first statue would recognize that foundational right to vote because so many of our other rights are built on it. Support for the statue has been overwhelming. We've received 1,000+ individual small donations. We've had vital support from New York Life Insurance Company, Ford Foundation, Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, and Girl Scouts who have helped raise money and raise awareness. The process for getting any statue approved in New York City is a difficult one, and doubly so in Central Park. and even more so to have it be so prominently displayed in Central Park. This statue will be on Central Park's Literary Walk. So it's been a long journey, but we're approaching the finish line, and we're excited. We're lucky that we have Meredith Bergman. She's a nationally recognized sculptor. Her works include the Boston Women's Memorial, the September 11th Memorial at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, and the FDR Hope Memorial on Roosevelt Island. So we're in good hands. The original design featured Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and a scroll. And on that scroll were 22 quotations from prominent and diverse women who are all part of this movement. The New York City Public Design Commission unanimously voted for conceptual approval of the statue, but removed both the scroll and the ballot box. So we will soon be announcing a redesign of the statue, so stay tuned for what that redesign will look like.
And you mentioned Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. Both of those have women had ties to Central Park?
They did. They spent time there. They took carriage rides. Elizabeth Cady Stanton played with her children in the park. For really much of their 50-year relationship, they worked and lived right here in New York City. Both of them were unmatched logistical and political tacticians for the movement. Decade after decade, they kept the movement alive. They ran a weekly newspaper about women's rights called The Revolution. So for this first statue, they seemed fitting.
And so while Monumental Women is best known for the statues, the organization has the larger mission that you've talked about and these bigger goals. What else are you working on?
Well, yes. So those two other parts of our mission, we will be launching an educational campaign about women's rights. Last week, board members spearheaded a Put Her on a Pedestal program where summer camp girls depicted a woman of their choosing to put on a paper pedestal. And it was a great and simple way just to get children thinking about the often overlooked contributions of women. We also want to work with the mayor's office and create a 5-borough women's history trail that would mark the birthplaces and workplaces of women throughout New York City. Through our final aim, that of putting out a challenge to all municipalities, we want people to really think about their public spaces, who's being honored and who's not. We know that women and people of color have been left out of history, so let's see tributes to all of them, the people who fought for the rights that we enjoy today. And then, beyond honoring them, let's carry on that work towards full equality, because we're not there yet. This is really about moving history forward. 42 million people visit Central Park every year, and they deserve, just like all the other people in town squares and city parks all over the country, they deserve to see real women, the women who built this country, who helped expand our definition of we the people, and who helped realize the American promise.
Why was this work important to you?
Well, for years I was a litigator at the ACLU, and I worked at the national level. I was also on the board of directors of an organization called Sakhi for South Asian Women. But there was something about Monumental Women that drew me in. It was local, it was tangible, and through the campaign I've had a chance to meet donors who are women in their 80s and 90s, and they're as politically active as ever, all the way down to girls who are age 8 through our collaboration with the Girl Scouts. And for those girls, this is really their first ever lesson in civics education. That idea of looking around, seeing a problem or a gap, figuring out what you can do to maybe help solve it. And they're lucky because they will get to see the culmination of their contribution when the monument goes up next year. So for me, it's really been this intergenerational conversation about women's rights. And we're in this moment, this Me Too and Time's Up moment, where women are noticing that their absence matters. Their absence from public commemorations or government or corporate boardrooms, that absence really means something. I've also been able to see that history isn't just this flat object that you study. It's a verb. It's moving all around us. And this campaign has really made me feel part of that forward movement, and it's been very rewarding.
So, Namita Luthra, how can people learn more about Monumental Women, and also how can they get involved if they'd like to in some way?
Yeah, we would love that. There will be exciting events happening next year as we and many others gear up to celebrating this 100th anniversary. For any of your listeners who are interested and want to get involved, please go to monumentalwomen.org or follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter to get updates. August 26, 2020 is going to be an extraordinary celebration of a foundational right, the right to vote, and we would love for you to be a part of it, so join us.
Namita Luthra, Director at the Elizabeth Cady, Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony Statue Fund, thank you so much for joining me, Jeff Simmons, here on WBAI today.
Thank you, Jeff.